So, Jenny, today we're going to talk about one of the symptoms of burnout, guilt. I'm sure it's something that we have all experienced at times. Um, so, let's start at the beginning. Jenny, help me understand, what is guilt?
So I'm sure there's more eloquent definitions of it, but for me, thinking about it, it's when you've had a bad outcome or something negative that's happened, and when you're attributing some portion of blame or taking all of the blame for that, and then making judgments about yourself based on it.
Okay, okay. And am I right in thinking that there are different types of guilt?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that there's the type of guilt where you have genuinely played a part in that bad outcome, but I think there's also a type of guilt that we're guilty of putting onto ourselves, where there's actually no logical reason for you to take responsibility for that bad outcome. And I think it's really important for us to be able to take a minute to just distinguish between the two.
Yeah,
I think that can be helpful in recovery in itself.
yeah. Obviously, we all understand that if we do something wrong, if we hurt someone, if we, do something wrong at work, that we're going to feel guilty about it. But one of the ways I've personally felt guilty is as a mum. I have a 9-year-old daughter who I love to pieces, but I also really enjoy my job and I want to have a career and I want to work. And putting her when she was younger into nursery and into preschool left me with this overwhelming feeling of guilt that I wasn't being a good mum and that I wasn't doing all of those, parental things that I should do with her, because I had this desire to work as well. And those feelings can be overwhelming. I mean, regardless of the fact that she was having a brilliant time at nursery and at preschool, and probably a much better time than she would have had with me. But those feelings would keep me awake at night. And they were probably, to a degree, unnecessary. She didn't know any different. It didn't affect her negatively. But is that one of the examples of where you've just said that we create sort of almost an irrational thought process in our minds about feeling guilty when we don't need to?
Yeah, I think so, Louise. And what what um what I think is significant there is that without you needing to work and do something else alongside being a mum, you would have probably made the choice for her psychosocial development to put her into nursery and for her to have those experiences around other children. You would have recognized as a mum that that's really valuable. So you would have done that anyway. But because you did it because you needed to go to work, you've latched onto that, and you feel like you're choosing your work over your child, but life isn't that simple. But it's really powerful that you're able to take a step back from that and just look more deeply about what's going on with those feelings,
Yeah,
and whether there is any blame or guilt to take from that.
yeah.
And I think that by doing that, it won't stop you feeling guilty. It's not an instant solution, but it can just take the sting out of the tail a little bit.
Yeah. But of course, there's on the flip side of those sort of almost self-created feelings of guilt, there are times when people genuinely feel guilt because something's happened, whether it's an incident or whether it's an event that's happened, um, and people can feel guilt that way as well, can't they?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes for the things that you haven't done as well as the things that you have done. So nurse was over something that I didn't do. And so I had an incredibly challenging day where there were a lot of incidents on the ward, but there was one in particular that was very severe, and I found it really difficult to deal with that incident, and to be stretched to the point where I wasn't sure what to do in that moment as a confident and competent nurse. That in itself really shook me, as well as having all the incidents to manage, and also being nurse in charge and being overwhelmed with the wave of paperwork that was building up that I didn't have time to do. And amongst all of my emotions and all of the practical things that I had to do, making sure all of the patients were okay and trying to keep track of just what had happened, and so that I was able to do the paperwork. Amongst all of that chaos, towards the end of the day, one of my healthcare assistants approached me and asked if you could unsee things. And that really stays with me. I even feel emotional now talking about it, because at the time, in the state that I was in, I didn't have much of a robust answer for her. I didn't have much time to give to her. I wasn't able to debrief her, and I wasn't able to debrief the team for that matter, which is something that's good practice and that of course I aim to do. And of course I communicated this, and we arranged a debrief sort of a few days later, but with logistics and the way shifts work, it's really difficult to get that team back on a few days later. So there were members of that team that didn't receive a full debrief, and I made sure that my colleagues rang them because I was off the following days, and checked in with them and made sure they were okay. So I did everything that I could, but the guilt that I took from that shift, from not being able to give that time to my colleague who was suffering, was absolutely immense.
Yeah, that's, I can imagine it. It does, these things do have such a big impact. And I mean, I guess that leads us on to, why do we have those feelings of guilt? Because we've all experienced them, haven't we?
Yeah, and it's quite, I would say funny. It's not really funny, but in these debriefs where we've sat down and thought about some awful outcomes that we've seen for our service users, there's a real pattern, where there will always be at least one person that takes the blame for that themselves. They take full responsibility, whether that's rooted in logic and is deserved or not. There will always be that at least one person that's feeling really guilty from what happened. And I think that it's linked to our values. It might not be something that we think about day to day, it might not be something that we're conscious of, but we all have values and things that we hold dear and things that we're particularly passionate about. So for me, it's family, loyalty, kindness, compassion. So that's why that incident affected me the way that it did, because compassion is important, kindness is important, supporting my colleagues is important, and I didn't have the luxury of being able to do that day. And whose fault was that? Mine, largely. Like, okay, it was a bad day, it's a busy day, like, I didn't find in that moment, or even years later, that rationalizing that it was a busy day made it okay, because it's not. So navigating our way through these difficulties is hard in itself, but when they chink away at our values, I think those are the incidents that stick with us more. And that's why you can have several debriefs with the same team, and different people will be affected at different times, because it's about their values.
And I think, do you know what? It's doing the job that I do. One of the things I hear again and again and again when I talk to anyone, not just clinicians, is these underlying tones of guilt, where they're not coming out and saying, I am guilty of this, but the way that they talk shows me that that's how they feel, and that they're taking the blame for certain things. I burnt out, I messed up, I couldn't cope. all of these things to me say that they have these feelings of guilt within them, that they did something wrong, regardless of like your scenario with a busy day, a day full of incidents and chaos and all of these things that you couldn't personally control. And people feel that they have a duty to be strong, to be able to cope, to not mess up. And then when they can't live up to these high expectations that they put on themselves, they feel guilty because they weren't able to achieve these unrealistic expectations that they'd placed on themselves. And I think people can feel guilty for things that they don't need to feel guilty about, don't they?
Definitely. There's a couple of things that sprang to mind there. And one is that people are very black and white about it. So they'll take a lot more responsibility than they should, even when they have done something wrong. So that's unhelpful. And also, you're right that people feel that they have a duty, but we're also told that we have a duty. The NMC for nurses expects a level of resilience for what we do, because of course, to be competent, you do have to have a level of resilience. But I think that we take that sense of duty too far sometimes, because we are also allowed to be mentally unwell. We are allowed to be human with it. But I think that sense of duty can stop us, and it makes it hard to be honest about what we're feeling. I've certainly experienced burnout symptoms myself, maybe once every 2 years throughout my career in healthcare. And my last one was only a couple of weeks ago, because the things that were happening in my personal life were encroaching on my ability to remain resilient at work. And it was the first time I was actually able to say to my employer that I'm not coming in due to my overwhelming levels of stress and just not feeling mentally up to performing. I'm usually a very honest, open person. So for me to have experienced those symptoms of burnout so frequently for so long, and yet not being able to speak out about them and be honest about them is quite significant. And it makes me think that, well, I know that I'm not the only one. I know that nurses struggle to speak out about their mental health, and I think so much has been done in the community to deal with stigma around mental illness, and it's really out there now that everybody knows that it's a thing. They might not know quite what to do with it, but we're working on that. But there's a stigma amongst healthcare professionals that we can't talk about this because we have to be resilient.
Yeah. And I think, we're going to do a series of conversations talking about lots of different symptoms that can all together create burnout. And it's something that I feel really strongly about, that we have to address these, because employers are more and more starting to realize that they have a responsibility to the people that they choose to employ, to make sure that they're not stressed and that they aren't suffering those symptoms of burnout, and that when they are, like you, are able to confidently call the person that you work for and say, I need time out, I need to reevaluate things, and be supported to enable you to do that. And I suppose that's sort of one aspect of what we can do to help with these symptoms of burnout. But what else can we do about those feelings of guilt that contribute? Because, I get that as humans, there are positives to feeling guilty. It stops us from doing things that are wrong, because we know that we would feel guilty about them if we went and did it. So it does give us that ability to sort of judge ourselves what we should and we shouldn't do. And there are, you know, I'm sure we're never going to eradicate those feelings of guilt, but what can we do about it, and what advice can we give people to help them so that those feelings of guilt don't overwhelm them and contribute towards burnout?
So guilt is rarely consistent. We'll rarely experience it through all of the days and nights. It's a transient thing, and when you're in the moment and you're taking the kids to school, or even if you're watching TV or you're doing those activities, you'll be distracted from it. And that's because guilt is not about the thing that you did or didn't do, it's about the thoughts that you're having in the here and now. So actually, it's easier for us to take control of those thoughts, because obviously we can't go back and change the past. And so without the thoughts, the feelings of guilt don't arise. So if you're able to take a step back from your emotions and recognize that you are one of those ones that's been affected from this incident, then that can be really powerful in itself. And I think you need to think about what your intentions were as well, because you didn't start the day aiming for that outcome to happen. Like we deal with a lot of complex situations, and so we have to recognize that these are not black and white situations that we're in. So you need to stop and think about just what was happening for you at the time. Just like in my example, there was an awful lot going on. I didn't start the day with the intention to ignore my junior colleagues. I have a great sense of duty, especially when I'm nurse in charge, not only for my patients, but for the staff that I'm working with as well. So you need to think about these things, because it will help you to forgive yourself. And that really is powerful with dealing with these feelings of guilt. And in line with forgiveness, a truly bad person wouldn't feel guilty. So
No.
you need to process that if you're taking it to the extreme that you had this bad outcome and it was completely your fault and you're a bad person because of it, you really need to have a think about that, because what you are versus what you did or didn't do are two completely different things that unfortunately will merge very quickly, very easily. So that's a trap that you really don't want to keep yourself in. And this is why we need to take a step back and just have a think about what's going on with these feelings and what's going on with these thoughts, and are they accurate? Also reflecting on what you could do differently in the future. And this is where it does get interesting, because sometimes there's learning and there's positives that can come from this thing. Certainly for me, that day taught me to manage my time differently, so that I have more time for my colleagues. And it's not always possible on days like that when it's so busy. I can't say I've been an absolute saint since, and I've always made time for people, because it's not black and white. But learning and thinking about how you can change and move forward can be really powerful. And it's certainly shaped my practice since. It's certainly given my business direction to the point that I'm now focusing as much as I can on supporting health and social care professionals. And I really do attribute it to that day, because that's what was the catalyst for the compassion I have for my colleagues. And sometimes thinking about what you can do differently will also highlight that there was absolutely nothing you could have done.
No.
Acknowledged that she had a poor outcome in a nursing home that she was working in, and it turned out she'd done her morning rounds in the usual way, gone round, and towards the end she found a patient who'd sadly passed away. And so what came out of that for Katie was feelings of guilt, that if she'd have done her morning rounds in a different order, she might have found that person sooner, and the outcome might have been different. But actually, what could she have done differently on that day?
No,
Absolutely
no,
nothing. But she has found something to latch onto where she attributes a portion of that outcome to her actions on that day. So it doesn't have to have a place in reality for it to be significant for you. But those feelings that you have are significant, and this is how we deal with them and move forward from them. Um, Anything else? I guess we all have things that we feel guilty about, all of us, and unless we're absolute psychopaths that just don't have the cognitive ability to feel it, we generally all feel guilty about these things. So never think that you're on your own with these thoughts and feelings, because that can really give power to them as well. Um, and we make it right by learning and by changing. We don't make it right by beating ourselves up.
no, no. And I think that's the key takeaway here, isn't it? That there, you mentioned about psychopaths there. That's an illness. They have an illness that stops them from feeling any guilt or remorse or anything. It's a completely natural feeling to have those feelings, and that's what shapes us into who we are. We've all done things in our past that we wish we could go back and not do, and we've hurt a friend, or we've betrayed a friendship, or we've done something that we shouldn't have. And whether that's in our professional lives or our personal lives, it happens. And I think it's about, as you've said, about how we deal with that, how we learn from it. I mean, if we can continue to keep repeating the same thing, we're not learning from it, and it's a missed opportunity there. But I just think it's really important that we address all of these different points that all make up to what can contribute towards a symptom of burning out. And normalizing it, and knowing that it's okay, and that we can all feel this way. And I guess this plays quite a big part in the training that you offer to health and social care professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because and this is why I like to work with health and social care professionals, because the problems that they approach me with really resonate with me, because I've been there and I know how it feels. And I really want people to have the opportunity to learn the easy way, and to think differently about how they're polarizing their thoughts, and try and live more in those gray areas where they can take a step back from their emotions, and rationalize things a little, because it's taken me years to work through some of these feelings.
Yeah.
So if I can support people to do it a little bit faster, then that's really lovely.
Jenny, it's been lovely talking to you today. I think I really look forward to our next conversation. I think we've yet to decide on exactly what that's going to be, but thank you ever so much for your time today. Hopefully everyone gets a lot out of this thing, and it resonates with lots of people. So we'd really love to hear feedback from anyone if it's resonated with them. So thanks ever so much, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Lou. Bye.